My name is Liam Hayes. I'm 42, and I've spent the last 2 decades watching my family see me as a disappointment, all while I was quietly defending this nation from threats they couldn't fathom. The charity fundraiser at the Riverside Convention Center was intended to be about raising funds for the families of veterans. Instead, it turned into the evening my cousin Ethan finally received his comeuppance. He stood there in his tailored suit, encircled by his typical crowd of sycophants, holding court as he always did. And there I was, in my simple dark suit and practical shoes, trying to fade into the background just as I had my entire life. "Oh, look, Liam's here," Ethan declared, loud enough for half the ballroom to notice. "Still playing dress-up, are we?" For 20 years of family events where Ethan made it a point to ensure everyone knew he was the one who had succeeded. The one with the corner office at the prestigious law firm. The one with the penthouse condominium. The one who had made something of himself while I was just... What was it he always said? Still figuring things out. "You clean up well," he went on, his voice saturated with that familiar condescension. "Almost as if you have a legitimate career." The group around him snickered. My Uncle Patrick, Ethan's father, gave me that look of pity he had perfected over the decades. "Liam, my boy, are you still involved in that computer business?" Computer business? That's what they termed my profession. When I informed them I worked in technology for the government, they pictured me as some low-ranking IT support guy. When I couldn't discuss the details because of security clearances, they filled in the gaps with their own notions. And Ethan, being Ethan, made sure those notions were as unflattering as they could be. "He probably just fixes printers," Ethan had remarked to the family at Christmas 3 years prior. "Government jobs are so simple to get, they'll take anyone." I recalled that evening with clarity. We were all assembled around my parents' dining table, and my father had just concluded boasting about Ethan's most recent promotion. He was on the partner track at 39, he'd announced with clear pride. Then he had turned to me with that expectant gaze, waiting for me to provide some comparable accomplishment. "I can't really discuss my work," I had said softly, the same reply I'd offered for years. Ethan had rolled his eyes. "See? He can't even describe his own job. How significant could it possibly be?" The thing is, his suspicion wasn't entirely unfounded. I had always been ambiguous about my work, consistently deflecting inquiries and changing the topic. What I couldn't tell them was that I had been recruited directly from MIT by the National Security Agency. What I couldn't clarify was that my computer business entailed analyzing threat matrices from hostile foreign states, tracking cyber intrusions that could disable our power grid, and briefing the Director of National Intelligence on matters that genuinely impacted national security. I was 36 when I became a senior intelligence officer, 38 when I was elevated to Deputy Division Chief, and at 40, I was the youngest person ever to command the Cyber Threat Analysis Division. My team of 47 analysts depended on me for direction on threats that kept the president up at night. But to my family, I was merely Liam, who worked with computers and couldn't even manage a decent apartment. That final part stung because it was, in a way, true. I resided in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Arlington, drove a 6-year-old Honda, and did my shopping at Target. What they were unaware of was that my security clearance included limitations on my residence, my associations, and the kind of lifestyle I could lead. Ostentatious displays of wealth invited questions. Background investigators disliked questions. But Ethan wasn't concerned with explanations he would never hear. He only cared that I didn't match his criteria for success. "Do you know what your issue is, Liam?" he'd asked at my nephew's graduation party last spring, his voice slicing across the backyard where our entire extended family was gathered. "You've never possessed any real ambition. You're 42 years old, and you're still behaving as if success will just land in your lap." I'd been standing near the dessert table, attempting to enjoy a slice of cake and listen to my nephew discuss his college aspirations. Ethan's voice cut through our chat like a blade. "I mean, look at you," he pressed on, gesturing to my khakis and polo shirt. "You dress like you're heading to a parent-teacher conference. You drive that old car. You live in some tiny apartment. When are you going to mature and get a real career?" The family had fallen silent. My parents appeared uncomfortable but offered no defense. They never did. My brother Dave shifted uneasily and found something intriguing to look at on his phone. My Uncle Patrick nodded in agreement with Ethan's judgment, as if he were dispensing profound truth. "It's not too late," Ethan had added, his voice adopting that feigned sympathetic tone he employed when he wanted to twist the knife. "You could return to school, earn an MBA. I could even recommend you at my firm. We're always in need of paralegal support." Paralegal support from the guy who believed knowing which scotch to order for dinner made him sophisticated. I had smiled and thanked him for the suggestion, just as I always did. What other option did I have? Inform him that I'd briefed the Secretary of Defense the previous week. Explain that the computer business I was in involved pursuing state-sponsored hackers targeting our defense contractors? Mention that I held 3 different classification levels above top secret? The security oath I had taken wasn't solely about safeguarding information. It was about protecting the individuals who relied on that information, staying secret, including my own family, who had no clue that their quiet, unsuccessful Liam spent his days ensuring foreign adversaries couldn't shut off their electricity or drain their bank accounts. So I remained silent, and Ethan continued to interpret my quietness as a weakness. Tonight felt different, however. There was a palpable tension in the air at this fundraiser that I couldn't quite pinpoint. The event was meant to celebrate local veterans and raise funds for their families, but I observed an unusual number of individuals in dark suits dispersed through the crowd. Security details. I recognized the discreet earpieces, their strategic positioning near exits, the methodical way their eyes continuously scanned the room. "Liam." Ethan's voice jolted me back to the present. He was introducing me to someone, a distinguished woman in an expensive suit who seemed vaguely familiar. "This is my cousin I was telling you about, Liam. This is Congresswoman Mitchell. She's on the Defense Appropriations Committee." The Congresswoman shook my hand courteously, but I could see Ethan hadn't finished. "Liam works for the government, too," he said with poorly hidden amusement. "In IT. He fixes computers or something." Congresswoman Mitchell nodded politely, but I detected something in her expression, a flash of recognition she quickly concealed. We had never met face to face, but I had briefed her committee twice in the last year on cybersecurity threats to defense contractors. She would have seen my name on classified reports, perhaps even my photograph in the briefing documents. "IT work is very important," she stated diplomatically. "Oh, I'm sure it is," Ethan retorted, his tone implying the contrary. "Liam has always been the practical one in the family. Not everyone can be ambitious, right?" That was Ethan's preferred word, ambitious. He wielded it like a weapon, perpetually casting himself as the driven one, while depicting everyone else as lazy or content with less. He'd been doing it since our teenage years when he was accepted to Columbia and I opted for MIT. "I suppose not everyone wants to challenge themselves," he had commented back then, as if pursuing computer science and mathematics was somehow the simpler route. "Well, I should," Congresswoman Mitchell began to say, but Ethan wasn't finished with his performance. "You know what's amusing?" he carried on, speaking to the small group that had formed around us. "Liam has been in the same position for 20 years, never promoted, never transferred, never even received a new title. I keep telling him he needs to show more initiative, but some people just aren't suited for leadership." The words struck as they always did, but this time was different. This time, I saw that several people in the group were observing with more than just passing interest. The woman near the entrance had turned to face our conversation. The man by the bar had moved a step closer, and Congresswoman Mitchell looked as if she had swallowed her tongue. "I've always held that true success involves taking risks," Ethan declared, warming to his subject. "Building something of significance, making a mark on the world. Some people are content to just drift, hide behind government red tape, and draw a salary." He was looking straight at me now, that familiar glint in his eyes signaling he was about to deliver the final blow. This was his method: warm up the audience, set the narrative, then go in for the kill. 20 years in the same office, doing the same job, with nothing to show for it. "I mean, Liam, when was the last time you actually did anything meaningful?" The question lingered in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Around us, conversations had ceased. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, waiting to see how I would react to this public dressing down. Ethan had finally achieved what he'd been working towards for 2 decades, humiliating me utterly in front of an audience. I opened my mouth to offer my usual deflection, to make some self-deprecating comment and shift the topic. But before I could utter a word, another voice sliced through the quiet. "Pardon me." We all turned towards the sound. A woman in a navy suit was approaching us, flanked by 2 men I now identified as Secret Service agents. She was tall, with blonde hair, and moved with a kind of authority that made people step aside without being prompted. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, though her tone indicated she wasn't sorry in the slightest. "But I think there's been a misunderstanding." Ethan's expression changed from triumphant to confused. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Deputy Director Sarah Chen, National Security Agency." She produced her credentials, displaying them just long enough for Ethan to read them clearly. "And I am here to present Mr. Hayes with the intelligence community's highest honor for his work over the last year." The color drained from Ethan's face so quickly I thought he might collapse. Around us, the crowd had fallen completely silent. Even the ambient noise from the rest of the fundraiser seemed to have vanished. "There must be some mistake," Ethan managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "No mistake," Deputy Director Chen answered. "Mr. Hayes led the operation that thwarted a coordinated cyber attack on our financial infrastructure last March. The work his team performed quite literally saved the American economy from catastrophic disruption." She turned to me with a small smile. "Liam, I know your cover demands you be modest about your accomplishments, but tonight seems like a fitting time to make an exception." I glanced at Ethan's face, the shock, the confusion, the dawning horror that everything he thought he knew was incorrect. Then I looked at my Uncle Patrick, whose mouth was agape, at Congresswoman Mitchell, who was now regarding me with undisguised respect, at the expanding circle of people who were starting to grasp that they had just witnessed something remarkable. "The President specifically asked me to convey to you," Deputy Director Chen went on, "that your work embodies the very best of public service. Quiet, dedicated, and absolutely vital to our national security." She presented me with a small wooden box. Inside was a medal I recognized but had never anticipated receiving, the National Intelligence Distinguished Service Medal. Only a select few received it each year. "Congratulations, Director Hayes," she said, using my full title for the first time. "Your promotion to Deputy Assistant Director was approved yesterday. Director Hayes, Deputy Assistant Director." The words seemed to reverberate in the abrupt silence. Ethan was staring at me as if he had never seen me before. "Director?" he repeated weakly. "Mr. Hayes commands the Cyber Threat Analysis Division," Deputy Director Chen clarified matter-of-factly. "He supervises a staff of 47 analysts and briefs the National Security Council on threats to our critical infrastructure. His clearance level is higher than most members of Congress." I observed Ethan's face as it went through a series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally, something akin to fear. He was starting to comprehend not just how mistaken he had been, but how completely he had humiliated himself. "The same job for 20 years, I said softly. echoing his words back to him. You were correct about that part. I've been protecting this country's digital infrastructure for 20 years. I began as an analyst and worked my way up through every level of the intelligence community. 3 presidential administrations have depended on my assessments to make decisions regarding national security. The crowd around us had swelled. I could see people throughout the ballroom turning towards our group, drawn by the unusual scene of Secret Service agents and the NSA's deputy director making an impromptu appearance. But you are right, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I never took risks. I just made certain that when foreign governments attempted to take down our power grid, we were prepared. When terrorist groups tried to hack our banking systems, we stopped them. When hostile nations sought to interfere in our elections, we tracked them down and neutralized the threat. Ethan's face had transitioned from pale to ashen. He looked as if he might be physically ill. And you're absolutely correct that I never made a mark on the world, I said. I just ensured the world kept turning as it should, kept the lights on, kept the internet functional, kept people's savings accounts secure from cyber criminals. Minor things, really. Deputy Director Chen was observing this exchange with clear interest. Mr. Hayes is being modest, she interjected. The operation he led last year prevented what could have been the most significant financial disruption in American history. We are talking about potential trillions of dollars in losses, banks collapsing, people losing their life savings. His team's work averted an economic catastrophe. But I'm just in IT, I said, looking directly at Ethan. I fix computers, right? Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in his life, he was utterly speechless. Actually, a voice said from behind me, Director Hayes does far more than that. We turned to see a man in military dress blues approaching our group. I recognized him instantly. General Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was scheduled as the keynote speaker tonight, but I had no idea he knew who I was. Director Hayes, he said, extending his hand. It's an honor to meet you in person. Your briefings on Chinese cyber capabilities have been invaluable to our strategic planning. Ethan was now staring at me as if I were a complete stranger. Chinese cyber capabilities, he repeated faintly. Director Hayes is one of our foremost experts on state-sponsored cyber warfare, General Morrison explained. His analysis helps us comprehend threats from hostile nations and prepare our defenses accordingly. He turned back to me. I hope you don't mind my saying this publicly, but the President specifically mentioned your work during our last security briefing. He called you one of the intelligence community's most vital assets. One of the intelligence community's most vital assets. The President of the United States had said that about me, about the man Ethan believed was coasting through some trivial government job. I don't understand, Ethan managed to say. Liam, you never said. I couldn't say, I replied simply. Security clearance. Most of what I do is classified. Even telling you my job title would have been a breach of my oath. The truth was finally revealed, and I watched Ethan process its implications. 20 years of condescension, 20 years of treating me like a failure, 20 years of assuming he knew better. All of it was founded on a complete misunderstanding of who I was and what I did. But more than that, he was starting to realize how this appeared to everyone watching. He had just spent 20 minutes publicly belittling someone who turned out to be one of the most important intelligence officers in the country. He had mocked someone who had the personal attention of the president and the respect of the highest echelons of government. Your cousin, Deputy Director Chen said to Ethan, has quite literally prevented wars. His work identifying cyber attacks before they occur has allowed us to respond diplomatically rather than militarily. He's saved countless lives. Ethan's father, Patrick, who had been quiet throughout this entire exchange, finally found his voice. Liam, why didn't you ever tell us? I tried, I said. Every time you asked about my work, I said I couldn't discuss it. Every time Ethan made assumptions, I stayed quiet because to correct him would have meant disclosing classified information. I took an oath to protect this country's secrets, even from my own family. The crowd around us had expanded to include most of the ballroom. People were taking out their phones, snapping photos of me with the deputy director and General Morrison. I could already foresee how this would play out on social media, the humble government employee who turned out to be a high-level intelligence officer. But I wasn't thinking about social media or public acclaim. I was watching Ethan's face as the full scale of his error became clear. He hadn't just been wrong about me. He had been spectacularly, publicly wrong in front of hundreds of people, including some of the most influential figures in government. "Ethan," I said quietly, stepping closer so only he could hear. "You asked when I was going to accomplish something meaningful. The answer is, I've been doing it for 20 years. While you were ascending the corporate ladder and gauging success by your salary and your apartment, I was ensuring this country remained safe." His eyes welled with tears, but I hadn't finished. "You spoke of taking risks and building something important. Do you want to know what a real risk is? It's taking a job that forces you to remain silent while your own family treats you like a failure. It's forgoing recognition and praise because the work itself is more important than how it makes you look." I paused, allowing that to register. "And as for building something important, I helped construct the systems that protect this nation from its enemies every day, Ethan. Every single day for 20 years. While you were closing deals and going to networking events, I was briefing the people who make decisions about war and peace." Deputy Director Chen approached us again. "Director Hayes, I hate to interrupt, but we do need to proceed with the ceremony. The Secretary of Homeland Security would like to say a few words." The Secretary of Homeland Security. Another person Ethan had likely seen on television, another individual whose existence in his worldview was confined to news reports and political commentary. And here he was, wanting to speak about my work. "Of course," I said. Then I turned back to Ethan one last time. "You were right about one thing, though. I have been hiding behind government bureaucracy. I've been hiding behind classification levels and security oaths, and the public's general ignorance about what intelligence work truly entails. But I wasn't hiding because I was ashamed of my work. I was hiding because my work was too important to be discussed." Ethan nodded mutely, tears now streaming down his face. Around us, people were beginning to move towards the front of the ballroom, where a podium had been arranged. This was actually happening, a public ceremony honoring work I had never been able to acknowledge. "Liam," Ethan said softly, catching my arm as I started to move away. "I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I had no idea." I looked at him for a long moment. This was the man who had spent 2 decades ensuring I felt small, making sure everyone in his family knew he was the successful one. This was the person who had doubted my ambition, my intelligence, and my worth at every family function for 20 years. "I know you didn't," I said at last. That was the point. As I walked towards the podium, I could hear conversations starting up behind me. People were assembling the pieces of a puzzle they hadn't even known existed. The quiet cousin who never spoke of his work. The man who lived simply despite a government job. The family member who never seemed to have impressive tales to tell. General Morrison was introducing me to the audience, describing my role without divulging classified details. I caught phrases like national security, cyber warfare, and prevented catastrophic attacks on American infrastructure. Each word was another nail in the coffin of Ethan's assumptions about my life. But as I stood there, accepting recognition I had never expected to receive, I understood something significant. This wasn't truly about Ethan, or about proving him wrong, or about seeking retribution for 2 decades of condescension. This was about finally being able to acknowledge who I was and what I had accomplished, even if just for one night. I had spent my entire career in the shadows, protecting people who would never know my name. I had made my peace with that anonymity because the work was more important than the recognition. But standing here surrounded by colleagues who understood the gravity of what I did, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not pride in proving Ethan wrong, though that was gratifying. Pride in the work itself, pride in the choices I had made, the sacrifices I had accepted, the quiet heroism of protecting a country that would never know my name. The ceremony was brief but profound. Deputy Director Chen spoke on the importance of cybersecurity in modern conflict. General Morrison discussed the threats facing our nation's critical infrastructure. The Secretary of Homeland Security thanked me personally for my service and commitment. And through it all, I could see Ethan standing at the back of the crowd, watching his entire perception of his family reconfigure itself around this new reality. He wasn't the only successful one anymore. He wasn't even the most successful one. He was just a corporate attorney who had spent 20 years deriding someone who outranked him in ways he was only starting to comprehend. After the ceremony, as people began to return to the fundraiser, Ethan approached me again. His face was pale, his eyes were red, and his usual confident composure was gone. "Liam, I don't know what to say. I feel sick about how I've treated you all these years." "You thought I was a failure?" I said simply. "I know. But why did you never defend yourself? Why did you let me say those things?" I considered the question carefully. Because defending myself would have meant violating my oath. And honestly, what you thought about my career didn't change what my career actually was. He nodded, though I could tell he didn't fully grasp it. How could he? Ethan had spent his entire adult life constructing a public persona, curating an image of success that could be measured, compared, and showcased. The concept of meaningful work that couldn't be discussed or celebrated was alien to him. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. "To make up for all of it." I thought about that. 20 years of belittlement couldn't be erased with an apology, no matter how sincere. The damage to our relationship, to my relationship with the whole family, couldn't be mended with good intentions. "You can stop," I said finally. "Stop making assumptions about people's lives based on what you see on the surface. Stop measuring everyone by your definition of success. And maybe learn to respect that some people choose service over recognition." Ethan nodded again, looking away. "I will. I promise." As the evening wound down and people started to depart, I found myself standing alone near the entrance, still holding the metal box Deputy Director Chen had given me. It felt odd to have physical proof of an honor I never expected to receive. "Director Hayes," a young man in a suit, approached me. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm a reporter with the Washington Post. Would it be possible to ask you a few questions about your work?" I almost laughed. After 20 years of enforced secrecy, suddenly everyone wanted to know about my career. "I'm afraid most of what I do is classified," I said, "but you could contact the NSA's Public Affairs Office if you're interested in general information about cybersecurity." "Of course," he said, but he was still looking at me with undisguised curiosity. "It must be difficult having to be so private about such important work." "It's part of the job," I replied. "The work matters more than the recognition." As I walked to my car, I contemplated what would happen next. Ethan would go home and tell everyone what he had learned tonight. My parents would likely call, full of questions I still couldn't completely answer. The family dynamic that had been set for 2 decades would have to be entirely reevaluated, but more importantly, I would return to work on Monday morning and continue doing the job I had been doing all along. The job that mattered. The job that protected people like Ethan from threats they couldn't imagine. The job that let me sleep at night knowing I had made a difference, even if no one could ever acknowledge it. The recognition was nice. The vindication was satisfying. But the real reward was the same one I had been earning for 20 years. The quiet knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was meant to do. Ethan would have to live with the memory of tonight, with the knowledge of how wrong he had been and how publicly he had humiliated himself. But I would go back to the shadows, back to the classified world where my real life existed. And for the first time in years, I was completely at peace with that choice.